All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 6 o'clock, Friday, March 21st. Normally, this is what we do every Friday. Normally, we would be doing our Poe class, and we would have been coming up with the second half of the Misadventures of Hans Fall. But given that tomorrow is a special occasion, we are having a town hall, something that Dennis Speed hosts every Saturday online. If you tune into the TLO Rumble channel, we're doing something different tomorrow, and it's a special event. It's in person, and if you want the details, you can contact me or you can contact TLO one way or another. You can get the details to come and check out tomorrow. If you are on my email list, you would have gotten some information on it. However, we did not want to give up our weekly ritual, if you will, of at the very least letting you know that we are paying attention to what's going on and we also have thoughts about what's going on. But one thing you may not know is that we had our international peace call again, as we have every week on Fridays. And we had heard from Ray McGovern, we heard from Dennis Fritz, and we had a video submission from the ambassador of Palestine to Denmark. I think his name is Hassassian. Come on and talk with Tim Rush about the importance of the Oasis plan and its implementation and why it should be fought out. And of course, we heard from the Schiller Institute founder, Helga Zepp LaRouche. And what ensued was a very good dialogue about exactly these topics. How do we actually get peace in not just for Israel and Palestine, but for the region as a whole? And just something to kind of encourage you guys to tune in live on the Zoom, not just on the live stream. I had asked the question. I recently found out that, there are other countries in the region that have conflicts that are not necessarily related to the Israel-Palestine. For example, Ethiopia is building a dam right now to better its infrastructure and power its economic engine. But this dam would also, what people don't realize is that the Nile River in Egypt, 90% of that water comes from Ethiopia. So obviously there are some concerns about who can actually control that water. But as I posed this question, Marcia Baker, who was another person presenting on the IPC, before I forget, and by the way, Marcia Baker's presentation was excellent because it was the actual implementation of what development in the region will actually look like. She responded to me by saying, well, I was only presenting a partial picture. And I appreciated that because hello, William Gilchrist. Thank you for that message. And I appreciated that because it's right. You can look at it from one side and say, oh, these are, kind of conflicts that cross borders and it's a resource war. But there is a higher manipulation going on from British banking, from British institutions that are trying to keep countries divided. So, with that being said, I don't want to take up more time. I know Dennis has had some thoughts about what's been happening lately, and I just kind of want to give you the floor, Dennis. So go ahead.
Edgar Poe wrote a story called Murders in the Rue Morgue. It's a famous story, and it's usually spoken about with respect to the plot line, the narrative around the murder, the solving of the murder, and the particular character of Poe's C. Auguste Dupin. What's usually ignored is the beginning of the story, which I will read the first paragraph of. It says, "It is not improbable that a few farther steps in phrenological science will lead to a belief in the existence, if not to the actual discovery and location, of an organ of analysis." Okay, now, phrenology was the idea of being able to determine intelligence by the bumps on the head. So, this is a joke, first of all, which is to be expected from Poe, not a slapstick joke. And that's why he says that this phrenological science, which is not a science, will lead to a belief in the existence, if not to the actual discovery and location, of an organ of analysis. Because what his point is that you're never going to find it. You'll go look for it, but you will not find a thing, a portion of the brain. Sure, there are portions of the brain that are particularly for cognition, but he's making a joke here. And he goes on to say, if this power, which may be described, although not defined, as the capacity for resolving thought into its elements, if this power be not in fact an essential portion of what late philosophers term ideality, then there are indeed many good reasons for supposing it a primitive faculty. In other words, that it's embedded, it's part of the makeup of a human being. The ability to analyze, he's saying, is essentially a primitive faculty. That it may be a constituent of ideality is here suggested in opposition to the vulgar dictum founded upon the assumptions of great authority that the calculating and discriminating powers, causality and comparison, are at variance with the imaginative, that the three, in short, can hardly coexist. For example, you have, especially if you're older, have always heard it said, well, I'm artistic, I'm not really scientific. I'm great at math, but I can't understand anything about music. And he is saying that this is not true. But although thus opposed to received opinion, the idea will not appear ill-founded when we observe that the processes of invention or creation are strictly akin with the processes of resolution, the former being nearly, if not absolutely, the latter conversed. This is one of the most important passages in Edgar Poe. It is a philosophical passage. It would actually be useful to deal with it in the same way as, let's say, a philosophical statement or a habilitation dissertation. And what I mean by that is that each of the sentences is very carefully considered, very carefully constructed, and should be read until understood, and should be studied in order to be understood. I think it's important to take it that way, because Poe is saying to us that the faculty, which many people will call genius, is primitive in the human mind. Some have heard of the case of, or cases of, for example, twins or others that are capable of, if you drop matches on the floor, they can immediately tell you how many matches are on the floor. And if you ask them how they do things like that, they will tell you they didn't think about what they did, they saw what they did. The neurophysiologist Oliver Sacks, now deceased, in his book The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, tells a case of twins that he worked with in New York City, who were capable of also essentially naming in a kind of contest prime numbers, in other words, which are only divisible by themselves and 1, like 7, which is divisible by 7 and 1, or 13, divisible by 13 and 1. They were able to, in their math, in their head, so to speak, formulate prime numbers of 8 digits, 9 digits, 10 digits. And he found this to be fascinating, because that's not the same thing as being able to count matches on a floor. That takes some sort of actual cognitive power, which is different than that. The twins, it should be said, that he discusses had below average IQs. They seemed to be not exactly autistic, but certainly reclusive and bereft of general social skills. In order to try to understand them, Sacks had a book of prime numbers, and what he did one day was to come into an area. They would sit in a particular location in the hospital that they were enclosed, the facility they were enclosed in. And he got in among them, and he had this book, and he basically concealed the book, and he would listen to them call out a prime number, and then he would look in his book, and he would call out a prime number. And what happened was, when he did it the first time, they both looked at him startled. They didn't say anything. And then they broke into big smiles, and then they made room for him. And so the idea was that I think they were someplace around about 9 digits. So then they went to 10 digits. He went to 11. One of them went to 12, and so on. And at a certain point, he had to drop out of the game because his book only went up, I think, to 12 or 13 digits. And when he came back sometime later, they were now inventing, discovering, visualizing prime numbers at 16 and 17 digits. So now this was not, as they call it, idiot savant intelligence. This meant that there was something else entirely going on of a different nature, and worth certainly not only considering, but thinking about, and trying to reproduce, and to figure out how, without calculating as we would think about it, they were able to visualize that sort of thing. Something has happened this week, which you've all heard about, and it's relevant to this Edgar Poe passage. And it is the release of the files, 80,000 pages initially, and then more files today on the Kennedy assassination. Some of you are aware that various media are asserting that this is a nothing burger. There's really not much there. Matter of fact, all sorts of people are saying, well, there won't be much there because they would have cleaned everything out of any really incriminating character, etc. That's the completely wrong way to look at it. Let me read you what the Los Angeles Times said 2 days ago about this. They said, a cursory review of the release did not immediately yield any major revelations or challenge the well-established facts that Kennedy was fatally shot by Lee Harvey Oswald while traveling in an open-topped convertible through Dallas. They just assert that that's fact. And then they say, however, the vast trove of documents will take significant time for historians and the Los Angeles Times to comb through. So what they're really saying is, we haven't read the documents. We know you won't. So why don't you just stick to your knitting or whatever it is you do until further notice from the authorities, who will tell you what you are allowed to think about these documents that you won't read. I mean, that's what that newspaper account says. Now, so many people are not following that advice, and they are doing their own, as they say, research. One such individual filed something which I want to refer to, because the idea is not what's in the files, but 3 things: what's not in the files, what is indicated in what is in the files that is not in the files, and why certain things are not in the files that should be in the files. Those things are knowable. And the idea of the method of analysis that Poe was speaking about does not require a roadmap. It requires thinking or imagination. So here's something that someone posted earlier today, which came our way. The person says, I found a clear connection between Lee Harvey Oswald, Israel, the CIA, and its MK Ultra program. MK Ultra refers to a psychological manipulation program involving brainwashing and drugging, including the first extended use of LSD. This is a program created by Richard Helms of Central Intelligence in the early 50s, I think 1953, which ostensibly was shut down later during the 1970s. So the individual writes this: the newly unredacted JFK files reveal a conversation involving Senator Baker, that would be Howard Baker, Mr. Angleton, that would be James Jesus Angleton of Central Intelligence, and others, discussing espionage allegations tied to Israel and mentioning someone identified as Sidney X. Now, this is not a Nation of Islam member. Sidney X is someone by the name of Sidney Gottlieb. Can we bring that picture of Sidney Gottlieb up so that people just see what he looks like?
Yeah, it's coming up.
Yeah, and while that's coming up, let me say that James Angleton was the head of counterintelligence for the Central Intelligence Agency from, I believe, 1953 to 1975. He was also someone with whom Lyndon LaRouche and his associates had a direct altercation in 1977 when he was part of a campaign to try to bankrupt and otherwise and actually terminate the organization. They had a program called Operation Fist, and we will go to his picture in a little bit. But this is Sidney Gottlieb. Now, so for those who are interested, and even if you, as I don't believe in just doing Wikipedia searches, let's limit ourselves only to that for the moment. So this is Sidney Gottlieb. Says Sidney Gottlieb was an American chemist and spy master who headed the Central Intelligence Agency's 1950s and 1960s assassination attempts and mind control program known as Project MK Ultra. Okay, so they're telling us that he is an assassin. He runs the Assassination Bureau for the Central Intelligence, and he ran MK Ultra. Okay, so this individual says, to read it, the sentence again, the newly unredacted JFK files reveal a conversation involving Senator Baker, Mr. Angleton, and others discussing espionage allegations tied to Israel and mentioning someone identified as Sidney X. Sidney X later was identified as Sidney Gottlieb in other declassifications. The highlighted section references Gottlieb and was a source linked to, quote, scientists, plutonium, atomic energy, and the CIA's Technical Services Division, hinting at covert operations unbeknownst to many. Now, that's another matter. Technical Services Division, you'd have to look that up separately. The unredacted text suggests deeper CIA involvement in international espionage involving Israel and highlights Gottlieb's role in, quote, sensitive operations. Well, now let's just take this issue of international operations. Of course, Central Intelligence is international, but so that's not surprising. But let's take one such operation, which was the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. Let's put up the picture of Patrice Lumumba and then go from there to the picture of Allen Dulles. Patrice Lumumba was the first democratically elected, if you want to put it that way, head of the Congo. He was president for approximately a year before he was assassinated. I believe he was approximately 36 years old, maybe slightly older. And there is at least from the files that were released in 1975 from the Church Committee, the House Select Committee on Intelligence, had a document, and that document's name, if I can retrieve it here, is on the alleged assassination plots against foreign leaders. So this is the section of that document discussing Patrice Lumumba. It says, the chain of significant events in the Lumumba case begins with the testimony that President Dwight Eisenhower, this would be the 1950s, he was president until fall of 1960, made a statement at a meeting of the National Security Council in the summer or early fall of 1960 that came across to one staff member in attendance as an order for the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. The next text is a memorandum of the special group meeting of August 25th, 1960, which indicated that when the president's, quote, extremely strong feelings on the necessity for very straightforward action were conveyed, the special group, and that's in capitals, agreed that planning for the Congo would not necessarily rule out, quote, consideration of any particular kind of activity which might contribute to getting rid of Lumumba. Okay. The following day, CIA Director Allen Dulles, let's put that his picture up, please, who had attended the special group meeting, personally cabled to the station officer in Leopoldville that Lumumba's, and now this is all in the words of this man, Allen Dulles, removal must be an urgent and prime objective. And then name is eliminated, it's Lumumba, a high priority of our covert action. You can act on your own authority where time does not permit referral here. So this is a CIA cable by Allen Dulles. You're seeing there who is the director of CIA to the station officer on the 26th of August. Now, the government document goes on to state the following. Although the Dulles cable does not explicitly mention assassination, Richard Bissell, the CIA officer under whose aegis the assassination effort against Lumumba took place, testified that in his opinion, this cable was a direct outgrowth, that is the Dulles message, was a direct outgrowth of the special group meeting and signaled to him that the president had authorized assassination as one means of effecting Lumumba's removal. So again, various people claiming that they have read the mind of Eisenhower and they have acted accordingly. So I think I'll leave that. There's more detail about this particular assassination, but here's why I read it. What's relevant is that this person who is reading a document sees something, they think they understand something, they call attention to something. But what and they talk about how Gottlieb, who we saw before, developed tools and poisons for covert operations. And he goes on to say that there's a declassified CIA cable which provides evidence, compelling evidence, that Lee Harvey Oswald was in fact a CIA asset. Now, what it is, it's a cable that's marked secret, addresses a particular media inquiry question about Oswald going to Japan. Was he there, and what did he do? What we know is that Oswald spent time at the Atsugi Naval Air Facility, ATSUGI. Atsugi was a site where the U-2, the famous spy plane, was run. It was a CIA hub for covert operations. It's the case that Sidney Gottlieb was there at the same time as Oswald. Now, in itself, that wouldn't be conclusive. He was in charge of the MK Ultra program, and he was running experiments at Atsugi. So there is a question, therefore, as to whether there's a connection between him and Oswald of any further type. That's not, of course, in the cable they found, But that's a question that only comes to mind because you're trying to read the Kennedy documents. And the important point here is that what begins to happen, there's one thing here. There's a cable that confirms that as late as 1996, a UPI, United Press International reporter, was pursuing a story that Oswald was recruited by the CIA when he was at Atsugi Naval Air Facility. It's important also to recognize that Oswald's connection to David Ferrie, you see either the JFK movie or otherwise know about this, also occurred at some point in this period. So why is this significant, and why is it important to ignore what people are telling you about the irrelevance of these documents? There's an individual that we don't have a picture of. And Jose, you can try to find this picture, but I've never found it before. Perhaps it's been posted. There's an individual named Colston Westbrook. First name is a peculiar name, Colston Westbrook. Born, I believe, in 1937. He was African American.
This is what I get when I look it up.
Okay, that's fine. That'll do. He excelled in languages. He spoke Korean, Japanese, Italian, French, and two others. Well, one other beside English. He was sent to Rome, Italy, when he was a teenager. He was an honor student to represent Contra Costa College at what was called the People to People Student Ambassador Program. You heard me, the People to People Student Ambassador Program. Well, what is that? If again, you merely were to use your Wikipedia, whatever, your Googling, as they say, and remember, this is not really research. That's what people call it. This is just free association. It's you simply doing connecto, as they call it. Connecto is not real intelligence. Connecto is simply a way of trying to create a kind of a, like with a jigsaw puzzle, putting pieces together. But until you have the pieces, you don't know what the picture is. You may think you know what the picture is. It's legwork. It's necessary, but it's also pre-digested. When you're reading something on Wikipedia, that thing you're reading is pre-digested. So the People to People Student Program was a travel service created in Spokane, or based in Spokane, Washington. It was founded in 1956 and is a part of what is also was the also called the U.S. Information Agency, a forward capability. A book was written in 1995 by a guy named Alvin Snyder, who worked at USIA. He said the following: the U.S. government ran a full-service public relations organization, the largest in the world, about the size of the 20 biggest U.S. commercial PR firms combined, public relations firms. Its full-time professional staff of more than 10,000 spread out among some 150 countries, burnished America's image and trashed the Soviet Union 2,500 hours a week with a Tower of Babel comprised of more than 70 languages to the tune of $2 billion per year. And that's from the 1950s. Colston Westbrook was recruited to this. Now keep his picture up, because I want to tell you something about what he did. He studied, but at some point he joined the Army, then joined the Air Force, and he was assigned to South Korea. And then in 1960 came back to California. He's originally from Pennsylvania, but he lived in California for a portion of his teen years. Upon completion of military service in 1967, he would have been 30 years old. He taught English at the International Christian Community in Tokyo. Now, while he was in Tokyo, he was recruited for a civilian position in South Vietnam with a company called Pacific Architects and Engineers. What was he recruited for? He was recruited to become a member of a contractor, as they call it, for the CIA's Operation Phoenix program. Now, for those of you who don't know what Operation Phoenix is, look it up on your own time. It was an extermination program. It was a program to create a set of, that's why it was called Phoenix, was that from the ashes of the extermination program, they would win the hearts and minds of the local populations by creating gangs and counter gangs among the Viet Cong, as they were called, for the purpose of creating massive distrust and, a kind of scorched earth policy against the Vietnamese. As people, I think, are aware, there were 2 million Vietnamese that were killed in that war. Let's also make sure people are aware that the United States lost that war. And next month, April 30th, will be the 50th anniversary of the United States losing the Vietnam War. But nonetheless, he was part of that, Operation Phoenix. And that's from when he was 30 years old. He came back to California after working there, and he became part of the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD. From there, he began to work at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, not as an orderly. He's working in the capacity with various prisoners. And what they did was, at the California Medical Facility, they created the Black Cultural Association. Now, that was an organization of Black prisoners. Well, one of the people that he was dealing with was a guy named Donald DeFreeze. Donald DeFreeze was a gun runner, also probably drug runner, but gun runner for sure, and was an informant for LAPD. That is Colston Westbrook, who is on your page there, knew, as I said, Korean, Japanese, Italian, German, and French, and also studied Swahili. And then, this is a little bit later, he creates his own program called Black English Dialectology. This is significant for other reasons, but I don't want to go to that yet. I mentioned Donald DeFreeze. Now, some of you have heard of Patty Hearst, and you've heard of the Symbionese Liberation Army, and you've heard of the kidnapping of Hearst and the various robberies that were committed by this group. Well, this group, formed at the California Medical Facility at Vacaville State Prison, was organized by Colston Westbrook. They organized it so that there were these meetings at the prison on Friday nights, and several hundred outsiders, mostly students from Berkeley, attended. It was out of this group that they recruited the terrorists of the Symbionese Liberation Army, who were taken through a brainwashing program involving a combination of something called the 7 Principles of Kawaida and other brainwashing techniques that were developed in the MK Ultra program. There were simultaneous other programs being run in San Francisco area. I'm not going to go into those, which this was also part of. But essentially, this was what Colston Westbrook's deployment was. And so, although people believed, some people naively believed, that the Symbionese Liberation Army was a left-wing Black terrorist group, sort of as a takeoff from the Black Panther Party, actually what it was part of the MK Ultra program. So when you talk about Lee Harvey Oswald, or when you talk about Hamas, by the way, or when you talk about parts of the PLO, the old Al-Fatah movement, or when you talk about other terrorist capabilities, understand that MK Ultra was this. So the person that wrote this little thing about what they are looking at doesn't have what I just said, that person doesn't know what I just said. But what is happening is that such individuals, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, are scanning these documents and trying to make sense of them. The analytic method is to negate or reject all of the detail and then look at intent. What Poe, in his stories, and in all of his stories actually, is always pointing to, if you think about it, and we'll be able to review this in coming weeks, is the intent, not merely of a narrator or of a particular character, although often the characters do express intent, but it's the intent of the author, who's never the characters, by the way. Poe is never any of his characters, but it's the intent of the author in terms of this idea of analysis to invoke in the reader this primitive faculty of imagination to see beyond the particulars and to see beyond the shadows, to see beyond the masks, to penetrate to the truth. What the purpose of the class series, which we sometimes have to, I think, repeat, I don't think it's a problem that it has to be repeated. Purpose of this class series is to equip you to join us and others in forming what we're going to call a committee for the truth. The most important thing to do in America today, tonight and today, is to not try to form a third party. It's not to try to protest against what is wrong. And it's not even to just come up with solutions as to what's right. That's obviously an important thing to do. Most important thing is to reintroduce the idea that it is legal to think. It is legal to think, because that is what has been removed from the practice of not only society in America, but many societies in what's called the transatlantic world. That if people believe, once again, that freedom of thought, not merely freedom of speech, is not merely a right, but a responsibility, then you can free the society. And this is what the purpose of our reading of these stories is intended to be. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy this story. That sure, they are enjoyable. It doesn't mean that you can't just sort of lose yourself inside of it. That's certainly a welcome thing. And if you find that this 2 hours that we spend usually from 6 to 8 is productive for you, I certainly don't want to begrudge you that pleasure. I just simply want to make the point that there are matters that will be revealed in those pages that are not in the pages. They're on the pages, but they're not in the pages. And the problem is to develop the character, the caliber, and the commitment of mind to imagine the truth that is actually not hidden, but hidden in plain sight, as in Poe's story, The Purloined Letter. So that's what we'll present tonight, and we'll resume, presuming that that is desired, next week.
Do you have a few more minutes, Dennis? There seems to be some reaction in the chat.
Sure.
I think there's a little more reaction than normal in the chat because I titled the stream, "What do the Kennedy files tell us?" So I think, there may also be some new people watching as well who just wanted to know what the hell the files are saying. So, for example, one guy here who's named Karl Marx, I don't think this is the real Karl Marx, said, "Isn't this the brother who spied on Malcolm X in Africa?" I believe this is referring to Colston Westbrook. Do you want to take that up, Dennis?
What you had in the Africa case is a set of people, of which Westbrook was one. There was a unit that was assigned to Malcolm. The concern about Malcolm at the point that he departed the Nation of Islam was his work to create the Organization of African American Unity. Malcolm, as an organizer, uh, was far more successful than people attribute to him, because it appears that nothing happened. In other words, he was not in the Nation of Islam, and he didn't create a new organization, but it was a very specific thing that Malcolm was able to do, and he did it through his grasp of ideas. So there was something called the Organization of African Unity, and the Organization of African Unity was emerging in the period from the mid 50s through the 60s. You have to remember that in 1945, there were only 3 countries in Africa that actually were independent. So all of the countries, or most of the countries, now 54 countries. So those countries became independent generally after I was born, starting with Ghana, Kenya, also Uganda, many of these countries. And so what happened is that when the people, African representatives, would come to New York to come to the United Nations, it was a natural practice for them to go to Harlem, where the African American Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, who was on the House Labor and Education Committee, would host them, and where people like Malcolm would meet these people. Now, Malcolm was Nation of Islam in the late 50s. So at that period, there were a few meetings. The most famous meeting, of course, was Fidel Castro going to Harlem and staying and deciding. Fidel refused to stay anywhere except Harlem, which made him a great hit in Harlem. But Malcolm's emergence from the Nation of Islam.
It's just a picture of Fidel and Malcolm.
Yeah.
Who are you referencing?
Yeah. And so his attempt to create the Organization of Afro-American Unity, because the Organization of African Unity was one place. So Malcolm decided he would identify Black Americans with Africans. Now you have to understand that was very controversial in the 1950s, because actually most Black Americans, we were called Negroes at the time, had a disparaging view of Africa. And it was normal if you were insulting someone, you would call them Black, and that was an insult. About pretty much the same kind of insult as the N-word. And if you wanted, you would say somebody was a Nairobi, for example. If you wanted to, that was an insult of the 1950s. Malcolm inverted that, and the Black is Beautiful. That was a campaign that Malcolm didn't introduce. That was done by Abbey Lincoln and Max Roach and the people who were part of the arts movement, who were in Brooklyn and in Harlem. This were the people who were involved in jazz and the early sort of modern jazz movement of the post-World War II period. And so there was that, but Malcolm and the others intersected this group. There's various people who were part of that. So Malcolm, this represented a challenge to the Central Intelligence Agency. The way that they handled this challenge was that the State Department operated something called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Now, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, or the CCF, was a program that was much broader than Malcolm, much broader than Black people. This was a program that had existed since the late 40s. And this program financed not only artists, meaning novelists, musicians, painters, ballet, so on, all over the world, but it also used or attempted to use various people against, in particular, the African American singer, lawyer, and not just activist, but a master thinker, Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson, who was not a member of the Communist Party, but was a pro-socialist activist who also spoke 14 languages fluently and was and sang in approximately another 15 or 16. Robeson had been blacklisted in the late 50s at the exact time that Malcolm became the minister in Harlem. And Paul Robeson in the mid 50s still operated out of Harlem. So I'm giving you this because to understand the answer to the question you're asking me, yes, there's Colston Westbrook, but there's a bevy of people, a crew of people. And for example, around the assassination of Malcolm, if you get those documents, if you were able to get those documents, you'll find the apparatus that I'm talking about. Now, first, it'll look like parts of the NYPD and a few other things that will come up. But as you begin to dig, you're going to come up with elements in Egypt, and you're going to come up with elements in Saudi Arabia, and you're going to come up with elements in and around something called the Muslim Brotherhood. And these elements were being coordinated out of Lausanne, Switzerland, by a person by the name of Jacques Soustelle. These elements are not merely within the Islamic world. It's simply that that's one of the coordination points. And the reason that coordination point is important to what we're talking about is that the Assassination Bureau operation known as Permanent Industrial Expositions, or Permindex, which employed Clay Shaw, who oversaw the assassination operation against Kennedy from New Orleans, that is also headquartered in Switzerland at the same time. So what you were dealing with around the case of Malcolm is a special expression of the same capabilities that killed Kennedy. And these capabilities involve things that operate out of London, City of London, to be specific, which is a particular financial district inside of the city of London. And Switzerland, as I mentioned, there are elements, of course, in Italy and France as well, but it's an assassination bureau. And it's a capability to, for example, attempted to assassinate Charles de Gaulle over 30 times. De Gaulle tried to warn Kennedy about it. And Malcolm is also assassinated by this same capability. Dulles and others were not fond of anybody black who was independent. And they used and deployed sometimes African American operatives against these people. It was infiltration and so on, but it was a broader capability. It's one thing, is what I'm saying. It's not the same assassins, not the same people, but it's like a bureau. Think about a multinational corporation that has offices in a lot of different places, and they operate differently in different places, but it's all one corporation. That's what was carrying out those assassinations at that time.
All right. So, I mean, it is 7 o'clock. I mean, it's up to you if you want to do like another 5-10 minutes, Dennis, but there was this question when you were talking about Colston Westbrook. He was fluent in all those languages and then created his own language.
What he was doing was he was in linguistics. This takes us into what people have heard called Black English and some other things, which some of us back at that time were familiar with. What he was doing was he was trying to create, it's sometimes it's called neuro-linguistic programming. You've probably heard that term. Sometimes people try to use that favorably. But for example, in Scientology, they had a key and code. You have a glossary of terms, which are only used within a given group. And then what you have is a syntax for these terms. And then this is like early, you have to think about what he was doing in the context of what people like John Lilly were doing you take a look at a book by John Lilly called Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer. This is something that came out, if I'm not mistaken, I believe in the late 60s. It's the same as the Dolphin Man. He's the guy that does he's the guy that does the floating in the tank, high on LSD.
Oh, okay.
Sensory
Yeah.
deprivation guy. That's him. But he wrote this book called Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer, in which he suggests that it's possible to program a person with as many as 27 levels down, where you have mutually exclusive programming in which one identity does not necessarily know the other. That doesn't necessarily mean there are 27 different identities, but there are 27 different levels at which you can access the mind of certain subjects. And so what Westbrook was doing was related to that work. Some of this work was being located or headquartered at Stanford Research. People from London like R.D. Laing, Ronald David Laing, were involved in it as well. And for a period of time in the late 60s, early 70s, particularly early 70s, they were trying to create radical terrorist capabilities out of mental institutions. For example, in Heidelberg, Germany, that was done. And Westbrook is part of that. So he's a brainwasher. And so he's trying to create an internally consistent brainwashing language with its own terms. And what you do is you create a club around this that then uses these terms, and you create a slightly extended community, which is the support community for your terrorist enterprise. So that way they've got logistical capabilities.
Well,
and that's how it works.
I guess I appreciate the level of answers that you're giving people, because if they really want to and actually know something, like they're asking a genuine question, you could have just, like with the first question, wasn't he the one who was spying on Malcolm X? You could have said, yes, that was him. Next question. But you actually, no, here's what's actually going on,
Yeah, because the person wants to know, so I'll answer it.
No, and that's great. And I'm saying this partly because the Saturday town hall meetings, which are done every Saturday, hosted by Dennis Speed, it's like people should be tuning into that regularly, especially if they want this sort of level of knowing something, right? Like if you actually want to know something beyond just like what people are talking about on Joe Rogan or what people are talking about on whatever podcasts, we really do have something quite unique what we do on Saturdays, which is like this stuff is just, very much in-depth, real historical analysis, but also real knowledge. And, so I'm just kind of advertising what your show on Saturdays at 2:00, although tomorrow we're doing it in person. It will still be live streamed. So if you're watching from somewhere where you are not, if you are watching from somewhere where you're not in the New York area, you can still tune in and live stream and stuff. This person, a KY woman one, I guess a Kentucky woman one, says, R.D. Laing is very interesting to me. You gave info I never knew. Thanks. So Dennis, I just want to close out with one thing, which will tie in. So, you were talking about the Kennedy files, and I know we heard from people like the New York Times and others, or whether, depending on what side you're on in the conflict about, whether you're pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, whatever, the point is they're trying to get you not to look into it. But, Tulsi Gabbard just put out a tweet 2 hours ago saying, update, an additional 13,700 unredacted pages of JFK assassination files that were previously available for review only in person at NARA have been digitized and are now available at the archives.gov.jfk. This brings the total number of pages available online to over 77,000. And then she says, as was stated when President Trump released the unredacted JFK files on March 18, a small number of files are currently only available for in-person viewing at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. And archivists are working quickly to digitize all records. Some documents are under court seal, and NARA is working with the Department of Justice to expedite the unsealing of these records. We will post updates as more files are uploaded to the website. Some people have asked us about why some of the recently released documents have sections blacked out. Here's why. According to NARA, some documents are under court seal, and documents that were previously released with redactions are still available online to show the public what has changed in the spirit of transparency. So I just think that we don't even, what I take away from this, Dennis, is that we don't even have all the files out yet publicly, and people are already drawing conclusions from this. And so I would ask if you kind of just take the time to reiterate what we said on the stream we did a few days ago about a committee to release all the files, not just on Kennedy, but on LaRouche too. But also, I wonder if the Kennedy files can be used as an exercise in intelligence. Everybody is looking for a smoking gun. Everybody's going to read through these files to see, like, yes, we had a second party set up, on the grassy knoll here, but they're not going to find that. At least I don't know if they'll find that. But, it is worth kind of figuring out, well, then how should we look at these documents, and how would we look at subsequent documents, King, Malcolm X, and of course, Lyndon LaRouche? That would be huge. So,
yeah, well, here's how to think about how to do this so that it doesn't remain in the passive mode, passive tense, or passive mood. Think about it. For example, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin on November 4th of 1995, 30th anniversary of that. Now, Yitzhak Rabin had been the prime minister of Israel. He was the defense minister of Israel. He'd been one of the most feared military commanders in Israeli history against the Palestinians. He was involved in suppressing Palestine in the Intifada, for example. He tired of this, and he realized that the amount of killing, no amount of killing, was going to actually resolve the problem. And he joined Yasser Arafat in a set of negotiations in the early 1990s, 92, 93 in particular, or by 93, I should say, 93, 94. They were called the Oslo Accords. They reached agreements, and Palestine was going to be recognized. The settlements were being dismantled that were there. There was the Palestinian Authority sort of got created. PLO put down its weapons. So all kinds of things happened. He famously said in one of the toasts, here's to those who have the courage to change their axioms. He was assassinated. Now, ostensibly, he was assassinated by a lone assassin at a rally. Who really killed him? What apparatus actually killed him? He was the prime minister of Israel. Who killed him? Just a disgruntled fanatic from Israel? Well, what's been the result of that? And what's happening now? Now, why do I put it this way? So you see what you have several people at the campuses that are right now being harassed by sometimes members of Israeli intelligence. We have this at Columbia, for example. And we have it at a couple of other universities where we've actually been able to identify. People know this. So these are people who are, in effect, operating on behalf of a foreign agency, but are yet, able to do things, right, against American citizens. That shouldn't be tolerated. How are you going to go after that? Well, you want to be able to not just have protests against it. What you want to do is go on the offensive and say, well, maybe Israeli intelligence, and maybe particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, has something else to answer for. Now, if you do that, and suddenly the focus is on the fact that Netanyahu came to prominence immediately after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin and was hated by Yitzhak Rabin's wife, Leah Rabin, and always talked against him till she died. So what are we really looking at here? And what's really going after people at Columbia? So I say this because if we all were to, think about it, we have the internet. So one thing is, got all those pages and people say, hey, how's anybody going to read all that? Well, you realize if it's 77,000 pages, right? So first of all, that's 77 people reading 1,000. Okay, that's a lot. How about if we have 154 people read 500? Okay, we say that's a lot. How about if we have 308 people read 250 pages. Well, all of a sudden that becomes doable because you can read, you can scan, right? You can go over it, you can talk about it. So you could have 300 people right now. We could go for trying to organize that on this Zoom exchange in the local class. Like we could decide, hey, you know what? We're going to actually read all of the Kennedy stuff because a lot of it's going to be, hard to read some stuff. Some of it's just going to be photocopies. We didn't say pages. It doesn't mean each one of the pages is going to have a lot of text. But what if that group now does the same thing, demands the same thing when the Malcolm files come out or the MLK files come out? If we do that, now we become a form of independent research capability. And then we can have somebody come in and report or give a talk, or somebody can respond, and we can ask for somebody like Jim DiEugenio, who's one of the co-writers on the JFK movie, or Lisa Pease, who wrote the book, the definitive book on Robert Kennedy. And Lisa, these people do research. They know how to do research. And they come on and say, hey, let me tell you how you do it and how you don't do it. And then you have all these people who, have been diving through this stuff and say, hey, I got a question for you. I went through these files and I saw these things and I know how to follow up on this. What would happen if we did that? What if that became one of the activities that people found themselves involved in just as citizens? So that what was happening is that we redefined the concept of citizenship as an active intervention into real history in a real way, not the past. We're going to dig up the past and see what finally happened. How come we always got to play catch up? How come we can't use that to see what's going on right now? And why, for example, if Trump is saying he doesn't want to be in war, how come he's bombing Yemen? How come he's talking about maybe going and bombing Iran? How'd that happen that fast? He hadn't even been there for 3 months. See, this is the sort of thing and that's the active way to do this.
All right, Dennis. So do you just want to end off by giving a pitch for why people should tune in tomorrow to the town hall? I mean, yeah. This is just for the live audience. I mean, for the online audience, of course, but still, go ahead.
Yeah, but just so people know, well, of course, there's been this talk. We use this term, the American system. And the American system does not mean capitalism. And the American system does not mean communism. And it doesn't mean socialism. And it doesn't mean make America great again or something like a slogan. It's a very specific school of economic theory, which was it was influenced by people from Europe, particularly Gottfried Leibniz from Germany, but it was advanced by Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton's 4 reports on public credit, the national bank, the constitutionality of the bank, and manufacturers establish the bedrock of the American system. Then there are several figures. Henry Clay is one. There's a guy named Matthew Carey, who was a pamphleteer for Ben Franklin and who is part of the American System School. There's his son, Henry Carey, who wrote all these books on the slave trade, domestic and foreign, why it exists, and how it must be extinguished. There's Friedrich List, who was German. These are all names that once upon a time in America, about 100 years ago, in fact, even more than 100 years ago, were known. Now nobody knows them. So we're going to talk about, and you referenced Lyndon LaRouche. Lyndon LaRouche was the sort of the perfection of that American system school of economy. And because he had this very particular method of economic analysis, as well as of solutions, economic solutions that he would propose, that's why he was so dangerous. Now is finally his moment, so to speak, where you can talk about these things, we think, freely. So tomorrow, Diane Sayre of the LaRouche organization is going to lead off. Then that's followed by myself. You'll be speaking there also, Jose, and I think Jason Ross, who gave one of the presentations, not for this, but on the Saturday classes, will also be with us then.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. And I'm glad, because one of the things that I neglected to ask in the live stream we did a couple of days ago was, when we were going through the American system, was, well, then wait, what did Lynn actually contribute to the American system?
Yeah.
So, I should have asked about the four laws.
Right.
Like that, then that would have been that would have been the 21st century example I should have shown. But anyway, it doesn't matter. We'll get into it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I'm sorry. Actually, no, this was great. This was fun. If this was your first time, make sure you subscribe and like to the stream and follow me wherever you're seeing this. And also check out tomorrow, TLO, the LaRouche organization. Check out their Rumble page and their X page as well. They will be live streaming. I'll be speaking. I might even be live streaming it too. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. I'm getting nods that I can do that. So I'll be live streaming it too. So you can also tune in on my platforms as well if you want to watch that. And with that, we are going to be out.